in the binding of Isaac, the Akedat Yitzchak. This is a moment when Abraham is asked by Kadosh Baruch Hu to go and bring his firstborn son, perhaps as a sacrifice on Har Moriah, which is the Temple Mount, Har HaBayit, as we learn elsewhere in the tradition. And the actual pasuk that gives this command from Kadosh Baruch Hu to Moshe is V'ha'alehu sham lehola. You should make an elevation offering of him there. Now it's very complicated here to figure out exactly what that means, because ha'aleo, on the one hand, ola means a certain kind of offering, an offering that is completely burned up. It all goes up literally in smoke. But on the other hand, we're talking about going into a mountain. So there is another sense in which this all involves elevation. So ha'aleo could just mean bring him up. And unless, in case it might sound like this is an evasive sort of lawyering around with the text, this is something that Chazal do themselves, because they, with a play on words, quote a pasuk from Yirmiyahu Navi in their Midrashim, Lo alta alibi, which is a pasuk that comes from Sefer Yirmiyahu when he is excoriating pagans who are engaging in child sacrifice in Eretz Canaan. So it's exactly about how Kadosh Baruch Hu rejects child sacrifice. Lo alta alibi means literally it never arose in my heart. But they put those words in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mouth when he's speaking with Avraham Avinu in a midrash in Bereshit Rabbah, where he says, Lo alta libi, meaning it never arose in my heart that you should sacrifice Yitzchak. And so in that sense, we're being reminded by Chazal that since HaKadosh Baruch Hu ultimately makes very clear he never will want or desire or accept child sacrifice, it cannot be the case that that's what he's saying to Avraham. And yet, on the other hand, if you just said, oh, it was a huge misunderstanding, Avraham should learn better Hebrew and have better grammar, and then he would have realized there was nothing stressful about this. He was just being told to go for a hike with Yitzchak. Clearly, the tension that exists in that moment is partly around the fact that there is a very reasonable interpretation of these words. That does mean that he should have made an olah, made an offering out of Yitzchak. And if that possible meaning of the text isn't there, then part of the truth of that passage in Torah is lost. And perhaps the most significant part of it, because clearly part of what that passage is about is a commentary on the relationship of a zealous Oved Hashem to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and what it means to be willing to give anything in service of Hashem, who gave you everything that you have, right? So that needs to be there, but it also needs to be there that maybe that wasn't what HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, because Tachlis, bottom line, he doesn't want child sacrifice, and we shouldn't be unclear about that. Much more so than Avraham Avinu, we now can say there are certain things that we're certain HaKadosh Baruch Hu would not command us to do, because he's told us very much the opposite, and then that is nailed down, and we're expected to base our attempts at understanding what he wants from us on a very rich starting point with a lot of content that we get from the written and oral Torah. However, I do think that even despite that, we can find ourselves often in these very analogous situations where there are decisions either to make in halakha, in questions of Jewish law, or more generally about how to live our lives, where there's still a lot of ambiguity in what the Torah is requiring of us, and different arguments to be made different ways. And there is this paradox of wanting to have this zeal for service of Hashem that you direct towards doing what he wishes, and at the same time, not being so sure necessarily always what it is that he wishes, which tempers our ability to act with confidence, perhaps despite cultivating that zeal in ourselves. And so I think one resolution of this in the case of Abraham, which really also is a bit of advice for us, I think, even though we have the Torah, is that it's resolved in stages. It's quite important, I think, that the first time this all gets kicked off, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says something to Abraham, and then he's off on his way, but that he's not just after that point, head down, only doing what he thinks Hashem wants without further contemplation or without further listening. So first there's a Vayisa Avraham et Einav, he lifts his eyes and he sees the place from far off, that he's going to perform this olah. But then later, There's also, the Malach calls for the first time to Avraham, there's an Avram, and it says his name twice. I think one of the reasons it says his name twice, and this is really reproduced in a lot of moments of Nivuah elsewhere in Tanakh, is that you need to be able to listen well enough for the voice of Hashem that you hear your name the second time, because you don't hear it the first time, because there's subtlety to how HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaks to us. And Avraham lifts his eyes again, and he sees, in this case, the ayil, the ram with its horns caught in the thicket, and he changes course. And so I think a crucial aspect of the personality of Avraham Avinu that we're supposed to carry into our Avodat Hashem is not just his zeal, which we see in his willingness to start on the path to this Olah, when that's the limited understanding he has, but also his willingness to change course when he further understands what Hashem wants from him, and then he's willing to change and reconfigure. So he doesn't just say, I heard the voice of Hashem once, I'm totally certain for all time that I know what it means. I'm not going to think anymore, I'm just going to do. From that moment on, he would be on the path to human sacrifice, right? What gets him off the path to human sacrifice is that he keeps listening and he keeps on being open to letting the voice of Hashem continue to change his heart as he walks the path, as he continues to act and do for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that doesn't mean it was a mistake to start on the path in the way that he did. It may have been indeed that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted him to be willing with his limited understanding to go to the top of the mountain, perhaps intending to perform the Olah, but the completion of that deed was his continued willingness to be open to further nivuah through further intellectual refinement of his understanding of what Hashem was asking of him.
Well, what's interesting about what you just said is that essentially, to put it a different way, had Avram Avinu not continued to listen, despite the fact that Hashem was calling him again, then essentially he would have been at that point listening to himself and not to Hashem.
Right. And I think it's not just a sort of a narrative accident of this moment. I think it's modeling for us the only way a human being can engage in some kind of dialogue with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because you can never get the full message perfectly the first time around. That is beyond us. We are not in the place to comprehend that which Hashem does in one moment of contact. And so the methodology that is being laid out is, if you're trying to shape your actions as you think Hashem wishes of you, then you shouldn't refrain from acting, because you can say, well, what do I know? I don't know the mind of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so I'm not going to bother to do what's being asked of me because I probably don't fully understand. So if I don't understand, I can't have zeal. I can't do what an Oved Hashem would do if only he could understand enough. And so I'll just sit here. No, what you do is you say, all right, I'll understand what is being asked of me as best I can, and I'll start on that path. And then I will change course accordingly, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu will keep on helping me to understand better if I remain open with my willingness to experience various things and include them in my cognition, and also for me to continue studying Torah, and for me to take those two things together, the created world and the Torah that I've been given to navigate it, and keep putting them together and taking another step and reiterating that process.
Just thinking of an interesting scenario where, had Avram been even more enthusiastic to carry out Hashem's will and moved a little bit faster, I suppose that just would have required Hashem to move even faster in responding.
Yeah, well, so that's something I've wondered about also. Like, I think in a completely unrelated way, seemingly, but I would argue that there's a similar model that you can explore in the text. So I was noticing once that we usually, when we read Sefer Yonah, we think Yonah is running away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he doesn't want to do what Hashem is asking of him. And I think that's a reading that's very important in the text, obviously. But what's also true is that when it says Vayivrach, that he, I don't want to pretend to get the pasuk exactly right, but that he fled milifnei Hashem. Milifnei Hashem, if you look at the usage of that phrase elsewhere, it is properly translated as at the behest of. Hashem. Like Moshe does things milifnei Hashem elsewhere in the Torah. So if Yonah is going to Tarshish milifnei Hashem, then it's at the behest of Hashem, which means that you could say perhaps Yonah actually thinks he's on the right path, right? That he believes in order to go to Nineveh, that there's something he has to do in Tarshish first to kind of be ready to go there to prepare himself. And you could speculate about what that is. I think that becomes a whole longer discussion of other things in Sefer Yonah that I think are interesting. But the point is that that does explain a lot of things in the text. If you take that to the text, why in the middle of a storm is he just taking a nap? Why is he not worried? He's just hanging on the bottom of the boat. And I think you could say, if you think you're on a mission from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then you could be that confident that you're fearless. If he thinks Hashem wants him to get to Tarshish, he's not worried about getting there. And so, he just hangs out. And then finally the captain says, okay, come up and call to your gods, because the captain's a pagan. And at that point, at a certain point, the storm becomes so intense that Yonah has to relent and realize, wait, I was wrong. I didn't understand what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted me to do. I'm on the wrong path, and that's what the storm is telling me. And so he tells them, the storm is because of me. Hashem is trying to stop me from going to Tarshish. And so throw me in the sea, because I'm still on my mission, and I still have ultimate confidence that if I'm on my mission from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he'll provide what is needed for me to accomplish it. And indeed, he does, right? That the big fish comes and swallows Yonah. So normally being thrown in the sea would be certain death, but Yonah knows it won't be. So he says, throw me in the sea. I don't know how I'll get home, but he does, right? And as soon as he's in the sea, the storm quiets because he was right. So that's a completely different way of reading Sefer Yonah than you usually get, but I do think there's support in the text for that. And I think it follows this model with Avraham Avinu in similar fashion, right? That you do what you think Hashem wants you to do, because you're never going to get it right 100% the first time. You take a few steps, and maybe you get some positive feedback, maybe you get some negative feedback. You have to interpret that carefully, because sometimes he gives you challenges even when you're doing the right thing, and sometimes he is trying to stop you in your tracks because with a pure heart and good intention, you're doing the wrong thing, and he wants to help you to figure out the right thing. So it's not easy to work out, but the Torah is supposed to be a guide. And it has to be a process of taking steps and continuing to be open and reflective.
Right. Well, what was required and is required is good faith and the desire to carry out the will of Hashem, which Avraham Avinu had.
And a willingness to study in order to figure out what that is. And a willingness to acknowledge reality, which is another important component of that.
And to listen.
Mm-hmm.
To know what Hashem wants of you, you have to listen. Right. Right.
You have to listen for his voice rather than only to your own heart. And it's either desires or even the intellectual peace it's made with its imperfect understanding.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org. If you are inspired by Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to get involved in Torah Eretz Yisrael activities in your local area, please fill out the relevant form by going to the link which appears on the screen.